Hello and welcome to the Demystifying Child's Play podcast. I'm so excited because today I've got Heather Schalk with me, who's a twin mum and the founder of the Toddler Toolkit podcast. And also she's got other things behind her belt. She's got the 3 Steps to Calm, Kind, Caring Toddler Cohort, which is a course. And she's also a co-author of a book which is coming out on the 8th of May, which I'll be telling you a little bit more about soon. It's called The Perfectly Imperfect Family, Real Solutions for Mindful Parents Navigating Today's Biggest Challenges, which I'm sure you are all about. She has a master's degree in education and is taught from pre-K through 9th grade for 10 years. Her passion is helping developing parents develop long-term customizable strategies that work, giving young children skills they need to advocate for themselves and providing with a more joyful quality of life, which, as you've heard me say a lot before, I'm all about more joy and less frustration. Her expertise is in childhood behaviour and development, specifically the toddler years 1 to 4. And her goal is to help parents understand the why their toddler is acting that way, what behaviour they have, and how to teach them those lifelong skills that help them advocate for their needs to be met. They have more fun, be more joyful, and we can strengthen that parent-child relationship, which, as I've said, if you've listened before, that is what we are all about. So welcome, Heather.
And thank you so much, Ruth. I'm so glad to be here.
Awesome. Now, Heather, I've had the chance to have a sneak peek behind the cover of the chapter that you've penned in your new book. And I'm really looking forward to the 8th of May date so that I can get my hands on the whole book. Now, what her chapter explores is why toddlers seem often unmanageable through behaviours like not listening, hitting, screaming, or having frequent meltdowns, which is one of the reasons when I saw this, Heather, I was like, we need to have you on this podcast because understanding play schemas really supports like this, and understanding toddler development in general goes hand in hand. So what it does is this reframes these actions not as defiance, but those signs of underdeveloped social, emotional, and language skills. Heather also introduces the concept of the toddler reactivity loop, where children get stuck in patterns of reactive behaviour. Now, instead of waiting for these moments to escalate, the chapter emphasises proactive teaching of key skills, especially self-advocacy and emotional regulation, when children are calm. Parents are encouraged to connect before correction, validating those feelings and offering alternatives to aggressive behaviour. For example, they could try squeezing or stomping. The chapter underlines the importance of repetition, modelling, and caregiver support in helping toddlers build those lasting self-regulation skills. Now, this is not all just from her head. She draws on developmental research, and the chapter makes a very strong case for early intentional support in toddlerhood to lay the foundation for healthy peer relationships and emotional resilience in school and beyond. So with all that in mind, I thought I'd help us get a little bit better, and now we can dig into some of those key topics that you cover. So let's dive on in. Everyone, let's get comfortable whether you're out on a walk, taking a real moment of quiet, or multitasking around the house. Let's dive in with Heather. So my first question, Heather, in your chapter you say, one of the biggest struggles that parents face is why won't my child listen no matter what I try? So what I'd love to know is what's really going in the child's brain or body in these moments that are labelled as not listening.
First of all, I want to say I just love this question. It's such a good question to really unveil what's going on behind the scenes, behind the curtain of our children. And I think when we can think this way, we can really shift and really open up to see what's really going on to support our children on their level. Often as parents, we're seeing certain things happening. We're feeling like they're not listening. And for example, maybe we give them a direction, like it's time to clean up. And maybe our child looks at us, but they keep playing. And then we're like, okay, I'm going to have to repeat myself. But then we feel like they're ignoring us because now we've repeated ourselves a few times. And then we choose to do something different. We're like, okay, the repeating things not working. Maybe I need to raise my voice and get louder. Or maybe I need to assert some kind of a boundary, so to speak, where I'm going to remove or take the toy away. And our toddlers and children can react differently to this. So maybe if we take the toy away or we get louder, they have a melt, or they laugh. Or maybe they decide to run in the opposite direction. It's like, it's time to put on your pajamas. They run away. They're not available to put those pajamas on. And so we're thinking, what am I doing wrong? I've tried everything. Why won't my toddler just listen to me? And this is a very common interaction. And I think it's really, this is very eye opening because there are barriers that can get in the way of our toddlers listening. So the first one is attention to hear and receive information and delayed processing time. So these are really ready to learn skills. And what I mean by attention to hear and receive information is our toddlers need to be available to hear the instruction and process that information. They might need a little bit more time. And often, classroom teachers might use a technique like singing a certain song to cue attention, or maybe they're going to clap 3 times, 1, 2, 3, and the class has to clap back 1, 2, 3, showing that they're ready and receptive to hear the information. And so that is something that when we're in the midst of parenting, we might just not be thinking of those things, which is totally understandable. We have so much on our plate. And maybe we're trying to do the dishes or to cook or this or that. And so when we give that direction, we might not be thinking of that. But that is the first one, making sure our toddlers are available to listen, not just having them listen right away.
I so get that. And all those examples you got, I was like, yep, I can see, yep, I've done that, yep. And then being a teacher myself, different strategies I use. I don't necessarily use at home because when you're trying to get 25 kids' attention versus one, very different. But actually, as you're saying, it's really similar because it's the same strategies you can use.
Yeah, it is. And maybe it's not necessarily a song, but there's different ways we can get attention. For example, I want to give the example of a transition item. So if it's time for snack and they're playing with some toys, we can provide them a cue. Okay, we're going to go to the table. We're going to have snack. Here's your cup. Can you bring the cup to the table, please? So it can be, we can try different strategies and different things work for different kids, but even just getting on their level and making eye contact can go a long way. Oh, what are you playing with? Oh, wow, that's really cool what you're doing. All right, I understand this is so much fun, but we're going to do snack now, okay? And so we acknowledge them and we're also preparing them and we're getting on their level, making sure they understand. And so the other thing is the prefrontal cortex. So our toddlers are still developing the prefrontal cortex. So things like following instructions, impulse control, switching tasks are very challenging. And that's why I just brought that transition toy or transition strategy, because transition for toddlers can feel very uncertain, unknowing. And what they also think of, I always think of with toddlers, like if they have to give up something, that can be very challenging them. And that's why I love proactive strategies that center around what they gain access to. By leaving this task, what are we going to gain access to by doing this next thing? And thinking creatively like that, because that's really speaking our toddler's language. The other thing is we get so busy, we might just start to give the instructions, like I said earlier. So that could be leading with commands. And so when we lead with direction, like clean your toys up now, for example, that can really cue our toddlers' need for independence, autonomy, and what can create pushback or what we may know as power struggle, because they might talk back and say, I don't want to. Or maybe it seems like they heard you, but they're just going to keep playing in one ear, out the other ear. Our toddlers, they also see this as an interaction. So ours are looking for connection with us, especially if we are busy, we have a lot on our plate. This is really frustrating for parents, but it can become a game to our toddler, even though we don't see it that way. And something that I call attention-seeking behavior is when our toddlers are seeking our attention, and it doesn't matter if the attention is positive or negative or how the feedback is, they are in this interaction with us. And so that can also be a reason why our toddlers might struggle with listening, because they're getting something out of it. They're gaining access to connection from us by not listening. And this is how they perceive the relationship to be or the connection to be, without teaching them other skills or understanding how to connect with us in more pro-social appropriate ways. And so on top of this, we also have something that we see what's on the outside of our toddlers, but there's also things going on the inside, our toddler's nervous system state. So even if our toddler isn't in a meltdown or in a reactive state where they're screaming or hitting, that it doesn't mean that they actually are available to live. Even if they're calm, they seem calm, let's just say. It doesn't mean they are necessarily calm. They could be internally dysregulated in an anxious state, which is a combination of reactive, which would be like hitting, a lot of physical behavior, and disconnected. It's like more withdrawn. So when you see toddler when you're telling a toddler, like, stop hitting me, or we don't hit, but they're just looking at you with a straight face and they're continuing to hit, they might be in that particular dysregulated state. So the reason they're not listening is, no, they have the straight face and they don't seem like they're in a tantrum. They might not actually be regulated. And I know as adults, we can be like that too, right? Where maybe we're really nervous about a presentation or something, and inside our stomach is twisting. We don't feel so good, but maybe the audience has no idea actually how uncomfortable we're feeling, but that there's things going on behind the scene with our toddler there and their nervous system. And it's quite fascinating how that really plays into their availability to listen and follow directions. And on top of that, I want to touch upon certain keywords that our toddlers understand and how our toddlers understand. So toddlers, they don't necessarily comprehend everything we say. Pick up on keyword. The context of a sentence, they might not be comprehending all of it. So they're getting maybe hit baby out of don't hit the baby. And this developmentally might depend on where they are. So maybe like an 18-month to 2.5-year-old, maybe they're just hearing those keywords. And maybe, depending developmentally, a 3-4-year-old might have a little more understanding. But even if they understand, we still know it goes back to teaching the skill, though, to get appropriate communication, which we will dive more into. And then there's the understanding piece of, do our toddlers really understand what we mean when we say what we say? Because if we say, oh, you need to have gentle hands, maybe they don't understand what actually gentle hands mean, because gentle isn't a concept relative to their world. And we haven't crossed the bridge to teach them that. Another thing is consequences to actions. They might do something because into cause and effect learning. And Ruth, I know you talk so much about that with the Platos, and that's really your field and avenue there. But that is another thing that really plays into it. And it really boils to toddlers lack communication and social skills. So they often do resort to hitting, throwing, and what we perceive as not listening as well, and escape behaviors where they're running away or they should be not following through with the directions given.
Yes, all that you've just talked about. People are watching the video. You've seen me nodding and nodding. There's so many times you've been talking about examples of, yep, I've seen that. Yep, I'm seeing that. Oh my goodness, that is exactly right. So before we go to the next question, if people are wanting to contact you and find out more about this, where do they find you?
Yeah, sure. So you can find me at Heather Schalk Parenting on Insta or Facebook. And my website is heatherparenting.com. And that's SCHALK.
Perfect. And I'll make sure I put a link in the show notes and in the podcast description so you guys can all find it really easily. Okay, you've got us so much to think about, but what I really want to ask also is about that toddler reactivity loop. So can you explain what it is and how parents can begin to break this cycle in day-to-day life? Because something that I've been thinking about is there's a lot of talk now about how our parents parented and how we parent and how the community parents. So what do you think about this toddler reactivity loop and how do we break it?
Yeah, so I'm very passionate about the toddler reactivity loop. It is a term I've come up with to describe the cycle that our toddlers can fall. They get upset, they're seeking our attention or acting out, so to speak, or they're pushing back with power struggles for independence, let's say. And so how it came about was I noticed my own twin toddlers they were repeating similar things, similar behaviors. For example, my toddlers, when they would get upset, they would cry and scream, it's broken, even if something wasn't broken. And it was a cue that they were being dysregulated. We were talking about being dysregulated early. So it could be a simple action like hitting or a simple phrase like it's broken that you cue into and say, I've seen this before. Okay, I'm noticing a pattern, such as throwing toys, dumping food, or talking back. And the thing is, the toddler reactivity loop is these, think of it just as a cycle of behaviors. Like first they say, it's broken, then they throw their toy, and then they flop on the floor. And then maybe a parent comes in to give support and they say, I don't want it, or I don't want you, or leave me alone, or I don't want daddy, or I only want mommy, or they have these kind of like similar responses they go into. And just being aware of that pattern and also being aware, like, when is this happening? The other kind of fascinating thing about all these behaviors is we think that is the behavior itself is the root cause or the why of their behavior. They're hitting because they're hit. That's why. Or it was the toy that upset them. That's why the toy caused the problem. But often those things are just symptoms. They're not actually the root cause of the behavior. And if we look at all behaviors communication, we can, what is my toddler really trying to say? And our toddlers are in a reactive state. So to get out of that reactive state, we really need to look at breaking the cycle, shifting to being proactive and helping them with what they're struggling with. And I have an example just to share how this can get set up or triggered and our toddlers will start reacting. It was a beautiful day. My husband told my boys, oh, we're going to do these really fun remote cars at the park. And the boys were so excited. And at this time, they were about 2 and 8. And so then it was about 20 minutes later, and one of my toddlers started screaming, it's broken, and threw the toy, even though the toy wasn't broken. And my husband was like, why is he doing that? Like, why is he saying it's not broken? Why is he just getting so frustrated over this? And I realized it had nothing to do with the toy or the toy being broken. It was so hard for him to wait to go to the park. He really wanted to go to the park. And so that waiting created the stress and dysregulation, and it went into this loop. And that's the loop that he often goes in when he gets overwhelmed, stressed, overstimulated, and that is go-to saying. Another example would be like, let's say we're at the beach, it's a beautiful day, 2 siblings playing with sand toys, and all of a sudden they start fighting over a shovel. We can think the problem is the shovel and the problem is sharing. The true root cause might even be related to that. It could be that the child was thirsty. And one way to know is as soon as they have that water and maybe they're dehydrated, they went back to playing very calmly. And it really had nothing to do with the shovel. So that is, it's just so helpful to see the pattern, because I think then it can really help us step out more like observing it happen and detach from it and taking it all personally. Like, there's doing all these things, like it's reflecting parenting, or my toddler's doing all these things because I'm not a good enough mom. Like it can take that out of it and go, no, this is just what my toddler knows how to do, and they're just repeating the pattern. But what I can do, I can help them get out of that.
That is so true. And I think with your examples, and you're saying one of your children's about 2.5, I was like, that's where the whole terrible twos come in. And that frustrates me to no end, because as you're saying, it's the communication and language, which is why the terrible twos come about, because these children are just trying to communicate, but they communicate in so many different ways. As you're saying, with that toddler reactivity loop, once you understand it, it's just a loop of trying to communicate, but not knowing how. Once you can reframe your mind and be looking at what are they trying to communicate through this, it doesn't become a terrible twos anymore. It becomes they're trying to learn to communicate. They're just little people who don't have the same words as us. So my goodness, dysregulation, toddler reactivity loop, that communication is just so key. But with those, you're talking about those meltdowns. And I know that a lot of parents, and I used to do it too, you're trying to stop that meltdown and you're trying to correct it in that moment. But the approach you've been talking about really leans into some skill building before all that chaos. But maybe one of those examples, can you tell me what it would look like in practice?
Yeah, sure. If your child is struggling with waiting skills or disappointment. So first we're saying, okay, my toddler's getting really upset. Now, maybe they do the behaviors than my toddler. Maybe your toddler doesn't yell, it's broken and throw toys. Maybe they scream, or maybe they're crying. Or when it comes to sharing a toy and getting upset, we can really look at first, we need to think about the toddler reactivity loop, look at what they're struggling with. Okay, they're struggling with weight, they're struggling with sharing skills, determine the skill they're struggling with, determine the emotion they're feeling too. And that's the why behind the behavior. So we know if they're hitting, we can approach it through passion and look at that skill gap that they don't have. So we really want to take a moment, let's say, if they're struggling with, let's go with that waiting park and the remote cars, because that was really hard for toddlers to wait, especially at 2.5 and even at 3 and 4. It is hard to wait. And so what we can do is we don't want to work on this when our toddler is upset. We want to work on it when they are calm, and we want to be proactive. So we can think about the skill like a waiting skill and really break it down with them, break down for them, taking the information or the teaching for them, and celebrating the small wins with praise. And I just can't say enough about praise, because we can teach so much through praise. It's so simple. It's praise, come but it's really that magical of a strategy, because if we're teaching our toddlers waiting, we can think about skill building chains. How do we build a skill from the simplest form to a more complex form? So a very simple form of waiting would be when our toddler is naturally waiting at any time of the day. Okay, are they waiting for a snack? Did they wait for you to hand them away? Did they wait for a turn with a toy from a sibling? Catch that moment. They naturally occur all the time throughout the day, and praise it. So I say, shout it out, call it out, whatever you want, however you want to remember it. Wow, you did a great job waiting just now. So we're prepping them for a longer time of waiting, because a little moment of waiting might only be a few seconds. Like maybe you're cutting an apple and they have to wait 1 minute, smaller amounts of time, and then waiting for the park. That could be an hour. It could be longer. That's really hard for our toddlers. So it's actually really a combination of them understanding what waiting actually is, and that the thing is still going to come. But there's also other tools that we can use. If we know our toddler struggling with waiting, we can use all kinds of tools like visual schedule, or first we're going to have snack, then we get to go to the park and do the fun cars. So not only can we help them and break down the skills, we can also use parenting strategies that help support them with that.
That's so good. And what I really love through it all is you're giving them self-advocacy. You're not just doing things for them. You're actually providing them strategies and talking them through and teaching them as you go. And as you said, just being bite-sized picks, you look at the first bit of that chain and you can build them. So it's developmentally where they're at. So you highlight self-advocacy as building blocks of social emotional development. Now, why is it that you're teaching your children to say things like, my turn next? Why is it important teaching them that just as important as teaching them how to share?
I think really we want our kids to have friends, and we want them to be liked, and we want these things for them. And I think that we think if they share, they're going to get access to friends, and they're going to be part of more social circles and more opportunities, and other kids are going to want to work with them in group works. But the thing is, group work and friendships, that we all know that, especially in our own relationships, we know that takes things like communication and some things that we may not have even thought of, like self-advocacy, which is a part of communication. Yes, it is great if our toddler can hand over a toy and share, but turn taking goes both when we both get a turn. And so that is really important, that our toddlers can be able to ask for a turn, ask for help, or anything's bothering them, to be able to say, hey, stop playing with them. So having those skills to be able to communicate is so important. It also, like we said, toddlers can get quite physical if they don't know how to communicate, and they're going to go to what they know how to do. If we want to give them alternatives and pro-social skills so they can work in groups and make friends, we also need for them to be able to say, I want to turn with that, because the alternative could be that they're going to throw a toy or try to grab the toy or get really frustrated and go into that anxious state we talked about earlier, where maybe they aren't actually physically showing any behavior, but mentally they're getting dysregulated. And that might pop up later. It might pop up after the play date. And then our toddlers are more set to go in a tantrum, and we think it's over handing them the blue cup or something like that. Oh, it must have been they didn't want the blue cup. They wanted the orange cup. But it really could have had to do with this play date and that they couldn't ask for a turn.
That is so true. And self-advocacy is something that is been around forever, I'd say, but it's relatively new in the parenting and education space. That I know when I was a child, it was sharing. You had to share, you had to learn about things. That whole self-advocacy wasn't as much of a big point. When now it's being brought in, which I love, because as you're saying, it just shows the child that they have the right to want something and actually have that turn taken go both ways. I especially notice that when it's a younger and older sibling, and quite often the older one always misses out and loses out because they have to share with the younger one. You have to share. But actually say, yeah, you do need to share, but we're going to get a turn again. And having that self-advocacy where they say, hey, actually, I've had it for a long time, or I actually was in the middle of playing. I don't want to share right now. So important. Okay, last thing I want to bring up, because one thing you were saying is about having that connection before correction. So I know all of us have had different experiences where we've been in the middle of this really big tantrum or a big power struggle or something that's with big emotions that are blowing up at home, or probably worse, in the middle of the supermarket. So what would be some of those first steps you could do to have that connection in the moment?
Yeah, so I think we want to go to the not cool thing we saw. It wasn't cool that they threw the blocks. It wasn't cool they hit their sister. We want to go right to that. And it's understandable because those things can be dangerous. Other people have feelings and they could be hurt. So we want to protect all that. So it's quite understandable why we get to that space first. But the thing is, if we do connect first, we can actually gain more knowledge into why our toddlers are doing what they do, and we can better help them make better choices next time. I see that you threw the toy. I'm wondering if you're feeling frustrated. Is something bothering you? Can you show me what it was? I think when we get that we really master communicating, or you don't even have to master it, just when we really just try to communicate a little bit more, it's amazing what we can really find out. And I have two stories. So the first story has to do with one of my toddlers was playing with his brother and another friend, and he got really upset. He threw a bubble blower toy. So just a toy, handheld toy. They press a button, it blew up bubbles. He threw it, it broke, and somebody could have got hurt. When that happened, instead of obviously need to make sure everybody's safe. So if we need to remove items or objects for safety, obviously, of course, but instead of coming at him like, why did you do that? That's full. Going to that more curious mindset and saying, what happened with the bubble blower? And really phrasing it in a way that isn't shutting down their brain. Because when our toddlers get stressed out or when they feel overwhelmed, their brain can shut down. The language side of their brain shut down, and they're not going to be able to respond. So that's why it can be important for us to take a breath and come to them. What happened with the bubble blower? And so my son was able to tell me that the bubble coming out right, and he got really frustrated. And for the tolerance, he actually has a pretty low frustration tolerance, so he gets frustrated easily. It's something a skill he has to work on. So his go-to was to throw it. And so when I understood it was really the bubbles were coming out right, he wasn't trying to hurt anybody. He wasn't really trying to break it. He wasn't trying to be a bad kid. He just reacted to frustration. So when we connect to understand and validate, then we can give the feedback and say, okay, it's not safe to throw. What can we do instead? Then we can implement that teaching. Okay, so we know we don't want to throw it. What are some other ways that we can get help with this? Could we ask if it's a babysitter or a teacher? Can we ask them for help? As a parent, we can ask them for help, or we can say, it's not working? What are some things that we can say? And sometimes our toddlers, depending on their age and developmental abilities, they might be able to actually give us ideas about what they can do. And it's not always us telling them. And then I have another story, the spilled milk story. So toddlers, as we say, they love cause and effect. They love to just do things. And some things are very messy and consuming to fix, clean up. And it can be frustrating. But one of my toddlers, he was throwing his milk and it was becoming a regular occurrence. Milk all over the floor. I'm tired of cleaning the milk. So one day I had the idea that I really wanted to connect instead of correct. And that's where my whole idea about connection over correction came from, was from this story when it happened. And so he threw the milk, it spilled out everywhere. And instead of saying, stop throwing like I usually did, or throw the milk, I decided to ask him, oh, I see you threw milk. What was going on when you were throwing the milk? And he told me he wanted to vacuum the milk up. He wanted to get like a handheld vacuum and vacuum it up because he thought vacuuming was so fun. And I was like, okay, most vacuums, unless they're special vacuums, don't vacuum milk up. It doesn't work. We have to get paper towels. And I showed him how we actually have, instead of me cleaning it up and being all frustrated and flushed, I was like, oh, here's a paper towel. Let's clean this up. But what can we do instead here? You could say to me, here, Mom, I'm done with my milk. Or you could put the milk back in the fridge yourself. So if you're done drinking it, but there's still some left, you could put it back in the fridge. And guess what? He loved it because every time after that, he didn't throw his milk. He put his milk back in the fridge himself because it really hit that dependence bucket where he wants that autonomy. He understood, he learned so many lessons there, but I think I learned so many lessons into really that's where that connection before correction comes in, is trying to get understanding. Then we can help them with, okay, this is your thinking. Okay, so these are more appropriate ways we can go about this. And if you really like cleaning up messes, and I know you probably have something to say about this, Ruth, because it's engaging in the appropriate play schema instead, or a better alternative to it.
Oh, definitely. And this is where, as you've said, and I've said lots of times too, it's all about reframing. It's about stopping and observing, looking at what your child's doing and seeing a way to reframe it. So for you are able to see, what are you doing, and finding out the why, and then being able to make an activity around it. So the cleaning up and actually working with them and giving them the options to put their milk in the fridge. For me as well, looking at play scheme and being like, well, they're constantly throwing and dropping things. What could we do? We could do that in the bathtub with some water. It could be colored water. We could do it outside. So finding those times where you can reframe your mindset, look at what they're doing from a different lens, and then being able to support them and getting that, working it out. I know for us, we've definitely had some times when there's been a lot of milk over. And actually, as soon as it's happening, saying, hey, let's clean it up together, taking them out of the high chair, putting them down, wiping it up, and then continuing on. Not making it into a game, but saying, that's not what we do, and then being able to support them in it. They're learning that if we make messes, we clean it up. But also there's that cause and effect and that testing while they're in a regulated place. If they were dysregulated, definitely wouldn't be doing that in that time. But thank you so much, Heather. There's been so much you've been sharing today. And I know that there's just a snippet of a bit into the chapter of the book you're in. As I said at the start, this book is out on the 8th of May in Heather's time zone. And it's only $1.99 US when it launches, just for the first 24 to 48 hours, I believe, which I know is a significant discount of the full price. So I've got an alert on my phone to make sure I log in and purchase it when it's at that awesome, amazing price. So can you tell me what time zone you're in so that everyone knows when it's actually releasing, and then how we can find this book?
Yeah, so it's in Eastern. So I'm in Eastern time zone. But however, I do know that there will be also special links for overseas, depending on where you live. But I will figure all that out, so you don't have to worry. So if you just go to my website, Heather Schalk Parenting, you can get one of my free resources. And then also, if you listen to my YouTube podcast, I have a link there where you can sign up for the book waitlist. So that will be really helpful too. And you can always reach out to me if it's easier for you going to social media. I get back to my messages and just let me know. But I'm constantly going to be posting the link for you guys to sign up and to find it. And definitely don't worry about the time zone. We'll take care of that for you guys. Make sure you get the special deal.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time today, Heather. Thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge with everyone, and for taking the time to write a chapter in a book, because I know that is no little feat, especially when you've got toddlers at home. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, today is a great day to play. See you later.